Take you live now to Moscow and a joint news conference with Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and Russian Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov.
Уважаемые коллеги, мы начинаем пресс-конференцию глав внешнеполитических ведомств России и США.
Сейчас я приглашаю наших.
I'd like to invite our guests to take their seats. Yes, there are places here. Come on in.
Добрый вечер.
Good evening.
Длинный день.
This has been a long day. We have had talks with the State Secretary of the U.S. Rex Tillerson. Right now we have had a long conversation with President Vladimir Putin of Russia. It has lasted for more than 2 hours. The negotiations have proved to be substantial and very frank. They have comprised the whole gamut of issues of importance to our bilateral relations as well as our interaction in the international arena. We have taken note of the fact that the current stage of our relations as well as the international situation as a whole are not the most calm ones. There are certain issues that have been inherited, so to speak, as time bombs from the previous administration, the Obama administration. We are being realistic, and we do understand that in order to overcome these obstacles, we have to make efforts, and we seek to do that. We understand that our American counterparts are going to move towards us as well, and our president has reaffirmed
попытки помешать нашему сотрудничеству,
we see that attempts at preventing our cooperation, there are even attempts
считаем, что это недальновидный подход, тем более, что история доказала, когда Москва и Вашингтон сотрудничают, выигрывают не только наши народы, но и весь мир. Подтвердили нашу общую нацеленность
for the sake of the whole world. We have reaffirmed that we both seek to fight without any compromise international terrorism. This issue has been raised by our presidents in the course of their telephone conversations, including their telephone conversation on April the 4th in the night when President Trump called President Putin in order to express his condolences on the terrorist attack that has taken place in St. Petersburg and the context of fighting international terrorism. We have talked about Syria, of course. We have touched upon the incident that took place after April the 4th, when in the environs of Idlib in Syria, chemical weapons were used. We have talked about the ensuing missile attack of the U.S. against the air base on April the 7th. We have stated our position on many occasions. Today we have said that there needs to be a very thorough investigation into this incident, which has become the subject of many speculations. Russia has spoken in favor of drawing the attention of the OPCW in The Hague to this incident, saying that the OPCW has all the necessary competences and powers to look into this incident. There's been an official letter by the Syrian government to the UN and to the OPCW with a request to dispatch as soon as possible a group of experts in order to conduct an unbiased and frank investigation both in Idlib as well as at the airport, the airbase that was struck. We've taken note of the American counterparts' willingness to support such an investigation. We do hope that the powers the UN and the OPCW have are going to be resorted to as soon as possible. In this context, we believe it's going to be counterproductive to try to adopt a resolution at the UN Security Council which would be not dedicated to investigating the incident, but more legitimizing the accusations against Damascus. We do have some arguments, but we're not trying to impose anyone on anyone. We want there to be a frank investigation. We have also talked about the state of affairs and the interaction of our air space forces as well as the coalition headed by the U.S. in the context of the memorandum we have on preventing incidents as well as ensuring the safety of air traffic over Syria. As you know, we have suspended the memorandum, but today the Russian president has reaffirmed that we're willing to put it back into force on condition that the primary force is going to be reaffirmed of both the American coalition and the Russian airspace forces. That is the objective of fighting Jabhat and Nusra as well as the associated terrorist organizations. We assume as well that the publicly stated position of both Russia and the U.S. and there being no intention to interfere within the domestic affairs of Syria or any other state are still in force, and we do hope that Iraq's example as well as that of Libya and other countries is going to be an admonition against trying to recreate the similar attempts anywhere else, including in Northern Africa. Let me say once again that we are willing to achieve an absolute defeat of ISIS as well as all the other terrorists. This is our common objective. It is still in force, and we have seen that this has been reaffirmed today as well. Apart from Syria and fighting terrorism in the region, we also have another political challenge, common challenge, that is to seek a political solution to the Syrian crisis. The U.S. and Russia have been at the forefront over the recent years of international efforts at finding solutions, at rallying all the parties concerned, both parties to the Syrian conflict and external players, bringing them together at the negotiation table under the aegis of the UN. Today, we agreed to continue to work bilaterally in order to facilitate this process, to push the multilateral process forward. We appreciate that apart from the Geneva process, which we are full-fledged members of, together with the American counterparts, we also have the Astana platform. At this platform, the American counterparts are represented as observers. Russia and the U.S. have other opportunities to help the international community settle the conflicts in Libya, Yemen, and last but not least, try to find common approaches to break the stalemate around the Israeli-Palestinian settlement. I do hope that our ongoing contacts to that end are going to be fruitful. We also have another matter on our agenda, and that is Afghanistan. As you know, over the last 2 years, there have been different formats resorted to seeking to rally an external support for the Afghan settlement. One of this attempt, one of these avenues we pursue is going to take place on April the 14th in Moscow. A meeting has been scheduled for the so-called Moscow format, which is going to be attended by Afghanistan, its neighbors, including Central Asian republics. The American counterparts representatives have also been invited to this meeting. We do hope that they're going to be able to participate in this meeting. We have also touched upon the Ukrainian crisis. We've got a common approach. The Minsk agreements of 2015 are to be observed and respected. We have also recalled how under the previous U.S. administration a bilateral consultation channel had been fostered between Moscow and Washington to supplement the N4, and we have felt the interest of the current administration
контакты по этой теме с тем, чтобы помогать искать практические пути реализации в полной мере Минских договоренностей. Мы будем такие усилия приветствовать, мы к ним готовы. Говорили мы и о ситуации на Корейском полуострове, которая всех нас очень серьезно тревожит, и Россия и Соединенные Штаты выступают за неукоснительное соблюдение резолюции Совета Безопасности, которые были приняты на эту тему. И сегодня мы говорили о том, как найти способы выйти из спирали конфронтации и перейти все-таки к тому, чтобы создать условия для переговорного процесса, для урегулирования проблемы денуклеаризации Корейского полуострова через политические усилия. Отметили мы и особую ответственность России и Соединенных Штатов за положение дел в сфере военно-политической безопасности в региональном и в глобальном разрезе. Сверили часы относительно хода выполнения тех договоров по стратегической стабильности, о сокращении вооружений, которые действуют между нашими странами. Договорились преодолеть некоторую паузу, которая в этих процессах сложилась по объективным причинам в связи со сменой команды в Белом доме. И рассчитываем, что контакты по рассмотрению хода нашего взаимодействия в сфере стратегической стабильности и контроля над вооружениями будут возобновлены и будут проходить по-деловому, прагматично, с прицелом на четкое выполнение того, о чем мы договорились. Упоминали положение дел в наших экономических связях. Чувствуем интерес бизнеса с обеих сторон к тому, чтобы наращивать взаимодействие, преодолеть негативную тенденцию, которая в объемах товарооборота и инвестиций по объективным причинам и по субъективным причинам сейчас наблюдается. Мы со своей стороны предложили поддержать инициативы деловых кругов двух стран о том, чтобы их прямые контакты получали поддержку со стороны российского государства и администрации Соединенных Штатов. Еще одна договоренность. Мы условились выделить специальных представителей от наших министерств, от Министерства иностранных дел, Государственного департамента, с тем, чтобы подробно, без каких-либо эмоций, искусственных обострений, посмотреть на те раздражители, которые накопились в наших отношениях за последние годы, ну, прежде всего, за годы правления администрации Обамы. Я считаю, что если будет проявлен с обеих сторон прагматичный подход к этой работе, то она, безусловно, принесет результаты и позволит оздоровить наши отношения. В целом, я думаю, что мы все понимаем, насколько непростая ситуация сложилась в наших отношениях в мире, насколько много желающих появилось поупражняться в особенностях современных коммуникационных технологий, в киберсфере, в целом в виртуальном мире, и насколько некоторые люди злоупотребляют этими возможностями, которые современные технологии предоставляют их использовать в своих весьма негодных политических целях. Думаю, что и в США, и в России есть достаточно здравых людей, которые смогут отделить зерна от плевел, и которые смогут все-таки руководствоваться коренными, неконъюнктурными интересами наших народов, наших стран, да и всего международного сообщества. Короче говоря, у нас, это мое ощущение состоявшихся переговоров, при всем количестве имеющихся проблем, как объективных, так и искусственно созданных, есть немало перспектив для совместной работы. Россия к этому открыта, открыта к диалогу с Соединенными Штатами в самых разных областях, и не только к диалогу, а и к совместным действиям, нацеленным на результат в тех сферах, где это отвечает интересам обеих стран. И, разумеется, мы будем
ожидать
pursue the interests of both countries. We will look forward to the U.S. reciprocating our approach, and I do hope that the many hours that we've spent with Rex Tillerson together, as well as with the President of Russia, have not been spent in vain. We understand each other better after the talks today. We do hope that these contacts will be followed up by us, as well as by our staff and by other government agencies of both the Russian government and the U.S. administration. Thank you.
Good evening. We just came from a productive meeting, as you heard Foreign Minister Lavrov mention, of about 2 hours with President Putin. We frankly discussed the current state of U.S. Russia relations. I expressed the view that the current state of U.S. Russia relations is at a low point. There is a low level of trust between our two countries. The world's two foremost nuclear powers cannot have this kind of relationship. We further discussed approaches to improving our channels of communication. We had a lengthy exchange of views regarding the situation in Syria and shared perspectives on possible ways forward. Earlier today, Foreign Minister Lavrov and I had a lengthy conversation about issues that require immediate attention and issues that require longer-term attention. We understand that improvement in the long-term relationship will be required if we are to make progress on issues where we have different views. We spoke extensively about Syria, and in some areas, we share a common view. Specifically, we both believe in a unified and stable Syria, and we agree we want to deny a safe haven for terrorists who want to attack both of our countries. We agree that North Korea has to be denuclearized. We agreed there needs to be more senior-level communication between our two countries, both at a diplomatic and military level. But there is a broad range of other issues in which we have differences. Some have global implications with long-term requirements, and others are understood to be bilateral. Over the course of the past 2 years, a number of reciprocal actions have been taken to demonstrate the dissatisfaction each country has with the other. We need to attempt to put an end to this steady degradation, which is doing nothing to restore the trust between our two countries or to make progress on the issues of the greatest importance to both of us. We have agreed to establish a working group to address smaller issues and make progress towards stabilizing the relationship so that we can then address the more serious problems. Foreign Minister Lavrov and I agreed we would consider further proposals made about the way forward in Syria, including consulting with our allies and coalition members. And we will continue discussions about how to find a solution to the Syrian conflict. We also discussed current threats posed by the North Korea's regime's ongoing development of their nuclear program, and the constructive role Russia can play in encouraging the regime in North Korea to change its course so that we can create the conditions for talks regarding the future. On Minsk, we consider the importance of the accord. Russia can make progress in the implementation by de-escalating violence and taking steps to withdraw separatist armed forces and heavy weapons so that OSCE observers can fulfill their role. Until full progress is made under the Minsk Accords, the situation in Ukraine will remain an obstacle to improvement in relations between the U.S. and Russia. I thank the Foreign Minister for a productive round of discussions, and I look forward to future conversations. Thank you.
Уважаемые коллеги, мы переходим к вопросам, и, пожалуйста, телеканал «Россия-24».
Здравствуйте, Анна Балдина, телеканал «Россия-24». Вопрос прежде всего господину Тиллерсону. Мы в последние дни слышали из Вашингтона не только противоречивые, но и, скажем так, агрессивные заявления. Я имею в виду заявление господина Трампа, который в интервью назвал президента Асада животным, и заявление представителя Белого дома господина Спайсера, который сравнил Асада с Гитлером, но допустив оговорку, что Гитлер не применял химического оружия. Скажите, как эти заявления способствуют целям дипломатии и когда риторика может измениться? Спасибо.
Helping the diplomacy or not? Thank you.
Well, I think the perspective from the United States, supported by the facts that we have, are conclusive. That the recent chemical weapons attack carried out in Syria was planned, and it was directed and executed by Syrian regime forces, and we're quite confident of that. This is just the latest in a series of the use of chemical weapons by the Assad regime, and notwithstanding their use on more than 50 occasions of chlorine bombs and cluster bombs and other types of weapons that are intended to maim and kill in the most horrific ways. So I think the characterization is one that President Assad has brought upon himself.
Я должен буду два слова добавить. Это очевидно та тема, по которой мы расходимся, поскольку Россия настаивает на проведении объективного расследования. Мы вместе с Соединенными Штатами в 2013 году выступили инициаторами ликвидации химического оружия в Сирии. В рекордные сроки были подготовлены соответствующие договоренности и в организации в Гааге, и в Совете Безопасности ООН. Есть доклады из Организации по запрещению химического оружия, которые фиксируют прогресс в ликвидации всех запасов химического оружия, которые были заявлены, которые также фиксируют проблему, заключающуюся в том, что пара мест, где хранилось химическое оружие, находится под контролем экстремистов. И процесс идет между Гаагой и Дамаском. Он не прерывался. Там случаются шероховатости. Мы используем наши отношения с сирийским правительством для того, чтобы побуждать их к абсолютно полному взаимодействию. И мы привержены завершению всей этой работы и будем доводить ее до конца. Что касается расследование сообщения о применении химического оружия. На этот счет есть миссия по установлению фактов Организации по запрещению химического оружия. Есть совместный механизм по расследованию, созданный между ОСХО и Организацией Объединенных Наций. У нас есть некоторые вопросы в адрес этих структур, потому что все обвинения, которые поступают в адрес правительства Сирийской Арабской Республики в применении химических отравляющих веществ, все без исключения основываются на так называемых дистанционных показаниях. Какие-то неправительственные организации, я даже не буду лишний раз заострять внимание на полностью себя дискредитировавших так называемых белых касках, многократно увлеченных в подлогах. Что касается тех обвинений, тех свидетельств, которые имеются в связи с применением химических веществ на территории, которую контролирует оппозиция, то неоднократно и сирийское правительство, и российские военнослужащие, которые работают в Сирии, передавали вещественные доказательства, включая пробы, необходимые для того, чтобы их исследовать, передавали их в Организацию по запрещению химического оружия. То есть это были не какие-то дистанционные утверждения, а это были вещдоки. И вот изучение тех доказательств, которые в материальной форме представляются в Гаагу, как-то очень сильно затягивается. Еще раз хочу сказать, я никого не пытаюсь обвинять, я никого не пытаюсь выгораживать. Мы настаиваем на объективном расследовании того, что произошло.
Nor are we trying to exonerate anyone. We just insist that there should be an investigation into what has happened and what happened on April the 4th. And just as it happened in the past,
И многие участники этой конференции, как только накануне пошли сообщения о применении химических веществ в провинции Идлиб, стали громко и активно требовать, чтобы именно этой теме была посвящена вся конференция, которая, в общем-то, созывалась для рассмотрения всего комплекса проблем сирийского урегулирования. Поэтому, учитывая тот ажиотаж, то колоссальное напряжение, которое создалось в медийном пространстве, в политической сфере мирового сообщества вокруг этого инцидента, мы убеждены в необходимости на трезвую голову провести беспристрастное, международное, независимое расследование этого инцидента, направив экспертов, интернациональную группу экспертов, объективных, профессиональных, и на место, где
has to be dispatched to the place where chemical weapons were used, as well as to the airport where, as our American partners say, was used as the starting point from which took off the planes delivering the chemical weapons. We are not convinced that this was the case, nor are we convinced by the TV images or by statements of people who were at the airport. There were no signs that would support the statement, the allegation that chemical agents were used there at all. I'm sorry for taking so long to comment, but I would like to underline that we are 100% sure that if our colleagues at the UN, as well as the Hague, try to avoid this investigation, this will signify that they are reluctant to find out the truth. But we will insist that the truth should be found. Thank you.
Josh Letterman with the Associated Press. Thank you. Secretary Tillerson, I want to ask you about your conversations with President Putin about Syria. You've predicted that Assad will leave power through a political transition. How will you compel Assad to participate in a political transition that leads to his own ouster? Are war crimes charges on the table? And how long will the United States wait for Russia to come around? And Foreign Minister Lavrov, if I may, your government and the United States government seem to be miles apart on the Syria issue, on Ukraine and other issues. Did you feel that you cleared up any of those issues you mentioned earlier today since you've had those discussions with Secretary Tillerson?
Well, we did discuss at length the future role for Assad, whether it be in a future political process or not. Clearly, our view is that the reign of the Assad family is coming to an end. And they have, again, brought this on themselves with their conduct of the war these past few years. We discussed our view that Russia, as their closest ally in the conflict, perhaps has the best means of helping Assad recognize this reality. We do think it's important that Assad's departure is done in an orderly way, so that certain interests and constituencies that he represents feel they have been represented at the negotiating table for a political solution. How that occurs, we leave that to the process going forward. We do not think one has to occur before the other can begin, and it will take a pace of its own. But the final outcome, in our view, does not provide for a role for Assad or for the Assad family in the future governance of Syria. We do not think the international community will accept that. We do not think the world will accept that.
What about the war crimes charges?
We discussed the issue that as time goes by and more evidence continues to be gathered, it is possible that the threshold necessary to charge individuals, including Bashar al-Assad, may be achieved. As you know, this is a very high legal hurdle in order to bring such charges against an individual. So I would not suggest to you that all of that evidence is in place, but I think the longer time goes by, it's possible that the case will be made, and there are certainly individuals who are working to make that case.
Ну, с своей стороны, я хочу сказать, что
I, for one, would like to
не
say
считаю, будто мы с
that I do
Соединенными
not
Штатами
think that
находимся
Russia
на непреодолимом расстоянии друг от друга
the U.S.
многим вопросам международной
at so great a
повестки
distance that
касается и
it cannot be
Сирии,
bridged
и
on many issues
Украины.
of the international agenda, both with regard to Syria and Ukraine. It's not impossible. In our introductory remarks with Rex Tillerson, we mentioned the agreements that are related not just to preserve and also to intensify the communication channels with regard to Syria and Ukraine. As for Syria and Bashar al-Assad, we have had sort of a historical background. Rex said that he's a new guy and he prefers not looking into history but to deal with the matters of today. But the thing is, the world is built in such a fashion that if we do not take lessons from the past, we will hardly be able to achieve success in the present. And I recalled certain situations when groups of countries, primarily Western countries, NATO countries, were sort of fixated on eliminating this or that dictator, an authoritarian or totalitarian leader. Oust Slobodan Milosevic, president of ex-Yugoslavia, NATO launched a war in 1999 in gross violation of the UN Charter as well as the Helsinki Final Act of the OSCE. The TV station was bombed, which incidentally is a military crime, however you interpret the Geneva Conventions. Residential areas were shelled. The Chinese embassy was also attacked. Civil trains and bridges were bombed. The shelling went on for 3 months. And then they ran out of targets that could be qualified as dual-use facilities. There was another dictator, Saddam Hussein, who was hanged after the invasion. We know how this invasion was justified. Since that, I think Tony Blair was the only one to repent publicly, admitting that it had been a fake, all the grounds for the Iraq invasion. There was another when Muammar Gaddafi, it had been said that there was no place for this dictator in his country. It was said that democracy would prevail, but we know full well what is happening in Libya right now. The Libyan statehood is all but non-existent. Our president talked about that yesterday with the Italian president. Right now we're trying to restore the Libyan statehood through the process of national reconciliation. We're trying to put an end to the situation in which this country turned into a channel of human trafficking, as your media have reported today. Incidentally, there are other examples, not so recent. The president of Sudan, Omar al-Bashir, there has been a warrant for his arrest issued by the International Criminal Court, and several days later the Obama administration decided that in order to settle this problem, Sudan had to be split into 2 parts. South Sudan was established, and the Obama administration tried to help them secure Omar al-Bashir's agreement to this splitting up. President Bashir held his end of the bargain. He cooperated. Sudan was split into 2 parts. in accordance with the Obama administration's plan, and right now Washington insisted that sanctions should be introduced against the country they helped create. So this fixation on trying to oust this or that dictator, an authoritarian or totalitarian leader, is well known to us, and we know how it ends. A successful ouster of a dictator is for me very hard to remember. If you have any examples, I'd be glad if you could share them with me. On Syria, as our president has stated on many occasions, we are not trying to put our hopes on anyone or on Bashar al-Assad or anyone else, as they do in Libya right now. We want them to sit at one negotiating table. As the UN Security Council resolution states, they have all to gather together. This has to be an inclusive intra-Syrian dialogue. And as the UN Security Council resolution states, the future of Syria has to be determined by the Syrians themselves, without any exemptions. The most important thing is not to eliminate a political leader from the chessboard, so to speak, but to agree on how the country is going to be built. It has to be democratic, it has to be secular, which is something the High Negotiations Committee speaks against. All ethnic and religious groups have to feel safe, have to feel represented at government agencies, and only if such a consensus is achieved, which has to be done through elaborating a new constitution, will the issues related to certain personalities be settled very efficiently without any tragic consequences either for the country or for the people. Thank you. Commerçant newspaper, please. Your question.
Спасибо большое. Елена Черненко, газета «Коммерсант». Вопрос господину Тиллерсону. Обсуждали ли в ходе сегодняшних переговоров вопрос о якобы имевшем место вмешательстве России в президентские выборы в США? И с вашей точки зрения, чем действия России в киберпространстве отличаются от действий США в киберпространстве? По данным американских СМИ мы знаем, что, например, ядерная программа Ирана была нарушена с помощью вируса Stuxnet, созданная США, а сейчас теми же методами, с помощью кибероружия, США пытаются остановить ракетную программу КНДР. И если можно, уточняющий вопрос обоим министрам. Вы говорили, что будет создана группа и спецпредставитель по налаживанию отношений. Идет ли речь о восстановлении двусторонней президентской комиссии? Спасибо.
Are you talking about resuming the work of the bilateral presidential commission? Do you plan to do that? Thank you.
We touched only briefly on the issue of cybersecurity, and in particular on the challenges that it is placing on everyone in terms of a new threat, an emerging threat. But I think I do make a distinction when cyber tools are used to interfere with the internal decisions among countries as to how their elections are conducted. That is one use of cyber tools. Cyber tools to disrupt weapons programs, that's another use of the tools. And I make a distinction between those two. Clearly, this is an issue that has emerged in our time, for which we have yet, as an international community, come to some conclusion around how we want to respond to that. And so there will be further discussions, and it is on the agenda, and it is in the agenda that Foreign Minister Lavrov passed to me for us to have further discussions in the future.
Я могу только подтвердить, что мы заинтересованы в тесном сотрудничестве по борьбе с преступлениями в киберпространстве. Мы, наверное, вы слышали, мы не раз об этом говорили, еще полтора года назад, в октябре 2015 года, предложили администрации Обамы учитывая действиями так называемых российских хакеров, которых они начали отлавливать
Russian hackers, they started to pursue all over the world without resorting to the legal procedures that exist between Russia and the U.S. They started to detain these hackers and prosecute them after extraditing them from third countries. Back then, we said that we were not interested in our citizens being involved in these crimes. Therefore, we suggested that a special bilateral mechanism should be created that would exchange information in real time about anyone trying to breach the international or national norms of both Russia and the U.S. The Obama administration refused this proposal of ours. They didn't respond, but then at the end of the Obama administration in November last year, they proposed that we should meet. Certainly, our relevant government agencies agreed, but at the last moment, the Obama administration changed their mind because they were probably very interested in undermining the American-Russian relations before the arrival of new administration in power. That's why we once again confirmed this interest of ours today. This is a relevant matter, and that is why we suggested that our contacts should be resumed at the level of special envoys of the U.S. administration and the Russian president, and also contacts at the level of relevant authorities. We feel that this time the result of these efforts might be different, leading to the establishment of new channels of communication and cooperation. And what is your second question? The Bilateral Presidential Commission? No, we have not yet touched upon this matter. It has been buried, so to speak, but maybe it might be resuscitated. Still, we've got channels to discuss some serious issues in our bilateral relations. It might be not under this umbrella structure. No, it might be in a different format. We have designated special persons who will sit down in quite common manner to look at our grievances, to look into those, and to look into how we can overcome these
present to President Putin or the foreign minister specific evidence the Russian government interfered in the U.S. election? And to Foreign Minister Lavrov, if an independent investigation finds the Assad government attacked his own people with chemical weapons, what will Russia do? President Putin says there's an effort to blame Assad and plant evidence. Did you present that evidence to Secretary Tillerson today? And would Russia refuse to consider to agree to any circumstance that results in the ousting of Bashar al-Assad?
We discussed no change in the status of sanctions that have been in place with Russia as a result of certain actions taken in Ukraine, as you know. I think as to the question of the interference with the election, that is fairly well established in the United States, and I think that has been spoken to on the Hill as well with the Congress, and it is a serious issue. It's one that we know is serious enough to attract additional sanctions, and so we are mindful of the seriousness of that particular interference in our elections, and I'm sure that Russia is mindful of it as well.
Государственный секретарь санкциями сегодня не угрожал, так, собственно, ничем не угрожал. Мы откровенно обсуждали те вопросы, которые у нас были на повестке дня, в том числе большинство, по которым у нас существуют проблемы. Вопрос о том, что будет, если расследование покажет вовлеченность сирийского руководства в химические атаки,
government's implication in chemical attacks. It's all hypothetical. We do not want to speculate. We see how speculation can bring results. We see some hysterical statements from the House of Representatives, from the Senate, after the airstrike against the airbase. We do not want to speculate on what's really important, on the serious matter of the use of chemical weapons, trying to exonerate anyone, on the attempt at staging an attack with the use of chemical weapons. What we want is to establish the truth and full compliance with American legislation, the Russian laws, the legislation, the laws of any normal country. But the principle of innocent until proven guilty has to be respected. Today, we send an appeal to The Hague to conduct an unbiased, transparent investigation. But should there be attempts at dragging on this investigation, we'll have to make the necessary conclusions. Now, as for the allegations that the U.S. government has irrefutable proof that we interfered with the electoral campaign, I have to say once again that we have not seen any facts, even hints at facts. We have not seen any evidence. No one has shown us any evidence, even though we have requested on many occasions that this evidence has to be produced to us to support the allegations, the accusations we hear. We do understand that there are many people who want to undermine our relations, to pursue their internal or external political interest, but these aims with evil ends, we want to hear concrete proof and then we'll respond accordingly. Thank you. RIA Novosti, please.
Добрый день, агентство РИА Новости, Полина Черница. Вопрос обоим министрам. США перебросили в район Корейского полуострова ударную группу вместе с авианесущим крейсером «Уилсон». И обсуждалась ли данная тема на переговорах и возможные риски, которые несет данный шаг для региона. И отдельный вопрос для господина Тиллерсона. Если такая группа переброшена в район Корейского полуострова, означает ли это, что у США есть какие-то планы по военной операции против КНДР? Спасибо.
Has some plans for military intervention in North Korea. Thank you.
The Carl Vinson strike group is routinely in the Pacific Ocean. It's in the Pacific theater. And its movements in the Pacific are made in a way that's planned by the military planners. There is no particular objective in its current course. The Vinson sails up and down the Pacific routinely, and so I would not read anything into the Carl Vinson's current locations.
Я только могу повторить, что мы обсуждали среди прочих многочисленных тем и ситуацию на Корейском полуострове вокруг него. У нас, насколько я понял,
situation on the Korean Peninsula as well as around it, as far as I understand. Given all the nuances, we still have a common determination to resolve this issue through peaceful means, to achieve the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula through diplomatic talks. There are certain efforts undertaken by the participants of what used to be called the six-party talks. We also have ideas of our own, just as our Chinese counterparts do. We believe that we've got to rally around the cause of finding peaceful solution to this issue. And the last question from the American side. Thank you.
Brennan with CBS News.
Thank you very much. Mr. Secretary, before these meetings, you said you believed Russia was either incompetent or complicit in these chemical weapons attacks? After your extensive meeting with both Vladimir Putin and Sergey Lavrov, do you know which one that is, and what concrete thing can be done to rebuild that lack of trust? And Minister Lavrov, if I could indulge you to answer in English, if you would, sir. President Trump has called Bashar al-Assad an animal. This is the leader your government continues to back. Can you tell us how long Russia will be willing to risk the lives of its soldiers and spend its money to protect him?
With respect to Russia's complicity or knowledge of the chemical weapons attack, we have no firm information to indicate that there was any involvement by Russian forces into this attack. What we do know, and we have very firm and high confidence in our conclusions, that the attack was planned, carried out by the regime forces at the direction of Bashar al-Assad.
Могу только подтвердить еще раз, что, как и в случае с так называемыми русскими хакерами,
and the case with the so-called Russian hackers
инцидентами в Сирии,
and the chemical incidents in Syria,
многочисленных утверждений на словах, получить хоть какие-либо свидетельства.
Get some concrete evidence, not just words. So far, we have not seen any facts. And let me highlight once again. In Syria, we are acting at the request of the legitimate government of the country which is a member of the United Nations. This country is under no sanctions of the UN Security Council. We are acting there in order to fight terrorism. And it is in our interest to prevent Damascus from being engulfed. That it had stated when being established, it had not fought consistently against the al-Nusra Front or ISIS until the Russian airspace forces were deployed in Syria. And even after this deployment of our forces, under the Obama administration, only performed strikes against certain posts held by ISIS, and it was always sparing the al-Nusra Front, and we've got some suspicions. We think that the al-Nusra Front is still chaperoned and spared to resort to Plan B, to overthrow the Assad regime with force. We know how this is going to end because we saw similar situations in Libya and Iraq, and we do hope that the people will prevail who know how to learn from history. Now, as for who is responsible for the crimes committed in Syria, we've got to look into that. But as one American counterpart said, there will be time for everything. We've got to set priorities. And recently we've heard new priorities from Washington saying that ISIS is priority number one. And as Mr. Spicer has said, we have the resources to defeat ISIS without doing anything to the Assad regime. This is the same thing John Kerry had told me. The U.S. administration, he said, was convinced that ISIS was a more serious threat and a more important objective than the Assad regime. So I think we think along the same lines. We have to see the common threats. They are apparent. And if we are to fight ISIS, if we are to emerge victorious from this fight without ousting the regime, when ousting the regime, this is no guarantee that we are going to defeat ISIS. On the contrary, ISIS might emerge victorious if we oust the regime. So we should be guided by common sense. Thank you, not by emotion. Colleagues, this is the end of the press conference. Thank you for participating. Thank you.
And join us later today when President Trump and NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg hold a joint briefing. That follows a meeting between the two leaders on the future of the alliance. Watch it live at 4 p.m. Eastern here on C-SPAN.